right, welcome to the DevOps Fundamentals series. Today in this episode, we're going to talk to you about the infrastructure as code. It's a practice, a DevOps practice that we've identified as being very popular with the DevOps community. I'm Thiago Almeida at NZThiago on Twitter, and I'm a senior technical evangelist here, more on the developer side of things. That's my blog there, talmeida.net. And today I'm joined by Oz. Oz, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Oz Pastırmacı. I'm a senior technical evangelist in DX, and I am more in the operations side of things. And my Twitter handle is on the screen at the moment.
Great. So, if you're looking at the software lifecycle wheel there, infrastructure as code mainly fits within the release section because technically you don't really need to deploy the infrastructure until you are doing a release to an environment. Of course, it also fits into develop and test as well a little bit, so that you have to develop and create infrastructure for your other environments as well. So if we're talking about infrastructure as code, what we mean is that it's a practice where you define the infrastructure of all the environments that are going to host one or more of your solutions or applications, and you use scripts and other files to do that. And you keep those scripts in the same source code repository or a different source code repository as the development team is using, so that you can have versioning of it, and you can also share the same environment description across multiple environments. Also, depending on the infrastructure that you're using to host your applications, you can do it imperatively with PowerShell scripts, Bash scripts, or other types of scripting, or also declaratively by configuration files that will be interpreted and then executed. Or, of course, you can do both.
Yeah, combine them.
Combine the two and then execute those across your multiple environments. There's a series of value adds that you get from this. You can see there optimized resources, accelerated delivery, a significant number of testing and deployment defects will happen when the environments are not aligned between each other. So defining the underlying infrastructure and then repeating that across the environments will reduce quite a lot of that. It also helps your development team, if you have them separate from ops team, to have a say in what the infrastructure will be in production and other environments, so that there's more of a communication between the teams, which is the whole idea of DevOps as well.
Actually, this is really one of the very important aspects of infrastructure as code. Forrester has a paper about this, infrastructure as code, the benefits, and they did a survey with like 300 people from enterprise companies. And one of the main things that came out of this survey is the developers and the operations team should be using the same tools, like same languages. I'm not talking about, the operations team should be learning to be a hardcore developer, but the two parties should be deciding on something that they would like invest time and efforts, like training budget, on that language or product.
Cool. So, if you watch the first episode that we had, DevOps, an introduction to DevOps, we sort of introduced this idea of a DevOps frame where we map 300-level technologies back to the DevOps. So in this case here, we have at the 100 level, the people, business practices that DevOps defines. So you can think of it like treating your infrastructure as commodity, having teams working with each other and similar practices like that. And then that sort of goes into infrastructure as code, which is the practice we're talking about today. Then finally, you can look at using ARM templates from Azure or Chef and Puppet with Microsoft Azure or other cloud providers. And that's the mapping that we have for this specific DevOps practice. All right, so we're going to get into it and show some demos.
The best part.
The best part. So to begin with, I'm going to cover the infrastructure as code with Azure Resource Manager templates. So Azure Resource Manager templates, they are templates that you use to define your infrastructure that will then be deployed to Azure. So to show you an example here, I have Visual Studio Code with a template here, DocumentDB website, And in here you can see we have parameters that are passed in via the parameters file so that you can change the parameters for this specific definition of your infrastructure. We have variables for in case you want to set values that will be used throughout your template. And finally, resources. In the resources section is where you define exactly what infrastructure you're going to deploy. So in this case here, I have a DocumentDB database account. I have a server farm, or an app service plan is what they're called now. And then finally, a website. And you can go as far as defining things like, for the website, I want to add an app setting called DocumentDB endpoint and reference the database account, the DocumentDB database account that was created earlier with the endpoint there. So once the website is up and the DocumentDB is already deployed, you can then link the two together, and you have app settings for that. So to show you here, what you would do is you would do a Azure, from the Azure CLI, you would do Azure group create, give the name of the Azure template group that you're creating, a location, West US in this case, the file that's going to define the infrastructure, which is the one I just showed you, DocumentDB website.json, and then finally a parameters file. To show you the parameters file, we have it here, and the only property here is the name of the project. Then I'm going to use that name across all of the infrastructure that I'm creating. So if I run this, that should kick off creating a new group on Azure. So that's run, and that basically told Azure, start creating this group for me. And I can also just do Azure group log show, and then the name of the group, Thiago DocDB node. And that should give you a list of all the logging that's being done for that group as it's being created. So you can see here, it's actually just started deploying my solution. A little bit more advanced on Windows. Let me just log in here.
And you can use PowerShell or even the portal to do exactly the same thing.
Yes, exactly. So here on a Windows machine, what I wanted to show you is from Visual Studio 2015, you can create a new project, and under Cloud, you have Azure Resource Group. For the Azure Resource Group, I'll just leave it with that name. You can see it has some existing templates here that you can take advantage of, like let's say a web app plus a SQL database. And that will go ahead and create that template file that I showed you from my Mac, and also create the parameters file that you need for this. So if we have a look at the solution here, you can see templates, website, and SQL database. One cool thing from doing this in Visual Studio is that it also gives you a JSON outline here, listing all the parameters, variables, and the resources that you might be defining as part of your template. So you can see here it's defining a SQL server. Inside a SQL server, it's defining the database, a hosting plan, the website, and some settings for that website as well. And then finally, to show you a full-on definition in using ARM templates, we have the sample Parts Unlimited that you might have seen us mention before in this series. So for the Parts Unlimited, we actually have this template here called Demo Environment Setup with a whole lot of parameters, some variables, and then defining the resources, a SQL server, a database, a hosting plan, app insights, website, and website rules. Okay, so I'll show you one last thing, and that is from PowerShell, how you would deploy this template, the demo environment setup. So to do that, I just called the PowerShell that Visual Studio created for me and pass in the parameters, Thiago PU for the storage account name, the resource group name, and then the template files, template and template file parameters. And that's just going to go ahead to Azure and deploy that template for us. What that looks like on Azure, let me just reload the Azure portal here. If I have a look at my resource groups that I have deployed, you see that I have that Parts Unlimited one deployed here. And it is actually, it has basically the same things that we defined in our ARM template inside this new resource group that we've just deployed. So the Parts Unlimited server for SQL, the SQL database itself, a website, the hosting plan for it, a storage account, and the application insights definitions for it. So that's pretty cool, defining infrastructure as code using ARM templates. There's quite a lot of other resources here on Channel 9 and also online regarding to ARM templates, so look into that.
So let me talk about how things happen in the non-Microsoft world. This doesn't mean that we're not going to be using Microsoft platforms, or just the opposite. We're going to be using Microsoft platforms, Microsoft Azure, or Windows Server, or SQL Server, but we'll be using non-Microsoft products like Chef and Puppet. The first example will be with Chef. Let me give you the concept about Chef. So they have a Chef server, and you have a workstation that you will be changing the cookbooks. Cookbooks and recipes mean that you are deciding on how to do things like, I want Chef to connect to my virtual machine and install this feature. I want Chef to connect to my virtual machine or physical machine and install this package in Linux, for example. And you have nodes. The computers you are connecting are called nodes. So Chef server gives you the ability to do this centrally. So you can create policies, you can create roles, and you can decide, okay, these 5 machines are my web servers. So here's the configuration I want to be applied to these 5 virtual machines. These other 10 machines are my SQL servers, MySQL, SQL Server, whatever. And I want to create a database on top of them when I'm creating them. This is just centralized and automated. And here is how it works with Azure. So you can see that you can keep your code in GitHub, in a repository in GitHub, even if it's related to infrastructure. One thing that is really changing the lives of ops is now we are more into coding. So we are now doing source control, versioning, that kind of stuff. This is really beneficial for the ops people, because you know that from time to time you have problems and you spend a lot of time just trying to figure out what the problem was. It was working. It was working on the developer's workstation. It was working on a QA server. It was working on somewhere else. But the moment you deployed this to production, the moment you created some infrastructure in your production environment, it just stopped working. And you don't know why. Infrastructure as code gives you the ability to use a standardized approach. So if you are creating a virtual machine, every time you run this infrastructure as code part, it will give you exactly the same virtual machine, no changes. Same packages, same settings, even the same file under the same directory. So as in the slide shows here, you can use GitHub repository to put your infrastructure as code. And then from your admin workstation, you can just create some definitions like I want this, I want that. And then your workstation will connect to your Chef server or your Puppet server. And Chef server will then connect to your nodes, your endpoints, and apply this configuration to your nodes.
And you can switch over, say, from Microsoft Azure to other platforms, or from GitHub to Visual Studio Team Services for the location of where those files are.
Exactly. And one other good thing is you can do this for Linux or Windows.
Yeah.
It's not just Linux or just Windows. So you can have you can be using just one product for all of your infrastructure in your company. And just to add something to the Azure Resource Deployment part, ARM templates part, we also have this thing called custom script extension. Basically, when the ARM template is running, you can just ask ARM to run another script. It can be either a PowerShell script or a shell script. So if you want to install Apache server, for example, to a Linux virtual machine, you can just say, okay, go install Apache. So you have options. That's the good part about infrastructure as code. You're not just locked in using some product or some vendor or some process. You have options. But one thing we are trying to advise to companies that are starting their infrastructure as code journey, decide on something. So yeah, in the first phase, you will be, evaluating products, what I want to use, Chef, Puppet, product X. Give it a time, but after you decide that, keep using it. Because if you have separate products, then you're going to maintain separate environments for the products. You need to train your staff for separate products, etc.
And we have another episode coming up for configuration management.
Exactly.
And we're going to get into this configuration of what runs inside the infrastructure that you're creating as well.
Exactly. Today we are covering how you are deploying, how you are creating the infrastructure. And that in that episode, we're going to talk about how we can prevent configuration drifts, for example. How we can make sure that something is always installed in your servers, for example.
Just duplicate.
So normally, when you install a virtual machine, you can run a shell script with Azure Resource Deployment or just separately. Here's an example shell script here. So it just installs these packages here like Java, JDK, JRE, MongoDB, Tomcat, and wget. And then you can see that it does some stuff. So it's basically creating an application environment called Parts Unlimited MRP. This Parts Unlimited MRP application is in GitHub, so you can just go to GitHub and fork it and use it. But this is not very handy for us because every time we create a virtual machine, we need to log into the virtual machine, follow these steps, and take a look if the steps succeeded. This is a burden for IT operations. We want to have automation. By automation, I mean I do not want to log into these servers to see if the script has run successfully, if there's a problem. I don't want to go into logs, etc. So I just want to give a product like Chef what I want to do, and Chef will act like a proxy on behalf of me and do this in my endpoints. So instead of running the script manually, you can create a chef recipe or chef cookbook. Basically, you convert your shell script or you convert your workflow into a Ruby file. Chef uses Ruby, so you can see that the packages, the shell script is doing exactly the same in Chef. Or you can do this with Puppet. The Chef and Puppet, the idea behind these two products are really similar. So you have a centralized console that are connecting to your nodes and deploying infrastructure. And this is, again, my Chef recipe to deploy this application. And what you need to do is you can have a Chef server. And you have options to even deploy Chef server itself. You can either use hosted Chef, which means you just sign up and start using a Chef server maintained by Chef company itself, or you can deploy your own Chef server, and we have a ready marketplace image in Azure. You can just go to marketplace and search for Chef server. You can either use your own license or you can just use the licenses coming with Azure. And same is valid for Puppet as well. It's really simple. It's just like creating an Azure Resource Manager deployment. You just decide on the name, number of nodes, etc., and it just starts running. Here's my hosted Chef server. So I have organizations. So you may have different infrastructure for different departments. So you can just create different organizations, or you can even have different companies being managed by the same Chef server. I'm not going to go into the very technical deep details of this, but here you can see my nodes. So I installed, you can think of like I have an agent running in that nodes, talking back to my server. Like in every X seconds, you decide on how many seconds, like every 60 seconds, it connects to the Chef server and asks, hey, do you have anything new for me? Do you want me to deploy anything? And it is not just limited to features, packages, etc. in the VM. You can also deploy Azure resources like Azure Virtual Machines, storage accounts, etc. So by using Chef or Puppet, you can just create your environment from scratch automatically. You don't have to do anything. And here are my nodes. You can see that the uptime, last check-in, things like that. And basically, here is my Chef workstation. This is the command to bootstrap a node, meaning you don't even have to install Chef agent to the endpoints by logging into them. I'm just using my Chef workstation, and it connects to my endpoints and installs Chef client, and then it runs the recipe or cookbook. For example, the application I showed here. So it's that simple. And another good thing is you can do this for like 1,000 endpoints. You can just say, okay, I want NTP to be installed in all of my Ubuntu 14.04 virtual machines in my environment. Let me show you an example file for Puppet as well. It's really similar to Chef. You can see that you are in charge of everything. You are in control. You can even decide that, okay, I'm going to use one workflow, and I want to decide, I want to use it for different distributions of Linux, for example. The NTP package is named differently in different distributions, so you can even say, okay, if this is gonna be run on a CentOS or Red Hat machine, go install NTPD. If it's going to be on a Debian Ubuntu machine, go install NTP because the service name is different. So this is really flexible and gives you the option to deploy things. And here's how you can deploy virtual machines, Azure virtual machines with Puppet, using the service manager, the classic mode, and also the resource manager mode. So Puppet can connect to your Azure subscription and use your Azure subscription to deploy infrastructure automatically. This is really important because one of the other benefits of infrastructure as code is preventing human errors. I mean, this is maybe the coverage of love songs, but really, people make mistakes. Even if it's a very simple thing like, okay, I'm gonna log into my server, change the name of the server, add it to another domain. You know IT, you know the daily life of operations. It's like firefighting all day long. So somebody can just come and say, hey, we need you right away. Just leave what you're doing and come with us. So you go, and when you're back, you just miss step 2. It's a very simple thing, but you may miss. These products, they don't miss a step. If there's an error, it just tells you, there was an error in step 3. Here's the log. So you can just check the logs. Is it a certificate issue? Is it something else? And know what's happening in your infrastructure.
Yeah, so some pretty big consistency and time-saving benefits.
Exactly. So yeah, this is basically how you do things with Chef and Puppet. Again, it's not just Linux. It's Windows and Linux. So you can use these products or Azure Resource Manager to deploy different products to Azure or even to your on-premises service. You don't have to use cloud. You can use your on-premise infrastructure to deploy resources. So it's really one of the very basic and foundational steps that any company should take because it's beneficial for both the developers and operations. So start small. Don't try to go big and do everything at once. Like, I'm going to automate my whole infrastructure. I'm going to just click a button and everything will deploy. No, baby steps. First, try to understand how it works deploying virtual machines. Then, try to understand how it works with deploying something else. And then you can just move step by step. Of course, the final destination is hopefully automating everything. Using infrastructure as code for everything. Okay. Yep, that's it.
We'll switch to slides.
Sure.
All right, so the last slide here, we're almost done. You can see you have quite a few options there with infrastructure as code, and this area is growing quite a lot. So you can look into those. Finally, we have the same resources that we show you in every episode of DevOps Fundamentals. You can have a look at the hands-on labs. The last item here is the more important one that will take you through the Parts Unlimited demo that we showed today and help you go through creating the infrastructure, both with ARM templates and Chef and others. A few others here. The DevOps Dimension show is another show that we have going on here on Channel 9 for you to check out, and a few other resources there as well for you to review. So keep tuned for all the other episodes that we have coming up for you. Thank you.
Thank you.